Section 38 of John Inglesant, A Romance. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Claire. John Inglesant, A Romance by Joseph Henry Shorthouse. Chapter 25, Part 1. "It is almost impossible for a man to form in his imagination," said the rector to Inglesant as they left the church, "such beautiful and glorious scenes as are to be met with in the Roman churches and chapels. The profusion of the ancient marble found within the city itself and the many fine quarries in the neighborhood have made this result possible. And notwithstanding the incredible sums of money which have been already laid out in this way, the same work is still going forward in other parts of Rome, the last effort still endeavoring to outshine those that went before it." Inglesant found this assertion to be true. As he entered church after church during the first few days of his sojourn in Rome, he found the same marble walls, the same inlaid tombs, the same colored pavements. In the somber autumn afternoons this splendor was toned down and veiled till it produced an effect which was inexpressibly noble, a dim brilliance, a subdued and restrained glory, which accorded well with the enervating perfume and the strains of romantic music that stole along the aisles. In these churches and in the monasteries adjoining, Inglesant was introduced to many priests and ecclesiastics, among whom he might study most of the varieties of devout feeling and of religious life in all its forms. To many of these he was not drawn by any feeling of sympathy. Many were only priests and monks in outward form, being in reality men of the world, men of pleasure, or antiquarians and artists. But, introduced to the society of Rome in the first place as a devoto, he became acquainted naturally with many who aspired to, and who were considered to possess, exceptional piety. Among these he was greatly attracted by report towards a man who was then beginning to attract attention in Rome, and to exert that influence over the highest and most religious natures, which, during a period of 20 years, became so overpowering as at one time to threaten to work a complete revolution in the system and policy of Rome. This was Michael de Molinos, a Spanish priest who, coming to Rome some years before, began to inculcate a method of mystical devotion which he had no doubt gathered from the followers of St. Teresa, who were regarded with great veneration in Spain, where the contemplative devotion which they taught was held in high esteem. On his first coming to Rome, Molinos refused all ecclesiastical advancement and declined to practice those austerities which were so much admired. He associated with men of the most powerful minds and of the most elevated thoughts, and being acknowledged at once to be a man of learning and of good sense, his influence soon became perceptible. To all who came to him for spiritual comfort and advice, he insisted on the importance of mental devotion, of daily communion, and of an inward application of the soul to Jesus Christ and to his death. So attractive were his personal qualities, and so alluring his doctrine, to minds which had grown weary of the more formal ceremonies and acts of bodily penance and devotion, that thousands thronged his apartments, and the method of Molinos became not only a divine message to many, but even the fashionable religion of Rome. It spoke to men of an active devotion which it called the contemplative state, in which the will is so united to God and overcome by that union that it adores and loves and resigns itself up to him, and not exposed to the wavering of the mere fancy, nor wearied by a succession of formal acts of a dry religion, it enters into the life of God, into the heavenly places of Jesus Christ, with an indescribable and secret joy. It taught that this rapture and acquiescence in the divine will, while it is the highest state and privilege of devotion, is within the reach of every man, being the fruit of nothing more than the silent and humble adoration of God that arises out of a pure and quiet mind. And it offered to every man the prospect of this communion, a prospect to which the very novelty and vagueness gave a hitherto unknown delight, in exchange for the common methods of devotion which long use and constant repetition had caused to appear to many but as dead and lifeless forms. Those who followed this method generally laid aside the use of the rosary, the daily repeating of the breviary, together with the common devotion of the saints, and applied themselves to preserve their minds in an inward calm and quiet, that they might in silence perform simple acts of faith and feel those inward motions and directions which they believed would follow upon such acts. To such a doctrine as this, taught by such a man, it is not surprising that Inglesant was soon attracted, and he visited Molinos' rooms several times. On one of these occasions he met in the anteroom a gentleman he had seen more than once before, but had never spoken to. He was therefore somewhat surprised when he accosted him and seemed desirous of some private conference. Inglesant knew that he was the Count Vesperiani, and had heard him described as of a noble and refined nature, and a hearty follower of Molinos. They left the house together, and driving to the gardens of the Borghese Palace, they walked for some time. The Count began by expressing his pleasure that at so early a period of his residence in Rome Inglesant had formed the acquaintance of Molinos. "You are, perhaps," he said, "not aware of the importance of the movement, nor of the extent to which some of us are not without hope that it may ultimately reach. Few persons are aware of the numbers already devoted to it, including men of every rank in the Church, and among the nobility of, and every variety of opinion and of principle. It cannot be supposed that all these persons act thus under the influence of any extraordinary elevation of piety or devotion. To what, then, can their conduct be ascribed? It cannot have escaped your notice, since you have been in Italy, that there is much that is rotten in the state of government, and to be deplored in the condition of the people. I do not know in what way you may have accounted for this lamentable condition of affairs in your own mind, but among ourselves, those among us at any rate who are men of intelligence and of experience of the life of other countries, and especially Protestant ones, there is but one solution: the share that priests have in the government, not only in the Pope's territory, but in all the other courts of Italy where they have the rule. This does not so much arise from any individual errors or misdoing as from the necessary unfitness of ecclesiastics to interfere in civil affairs. They have not souls large enough nor tender enough for government. They are trained in an inflexible code of morals and of conduct from which they cannot swerve. To this code all human needs must bow. They are cut off from sympathy with their fellows on most points, and their natural inclinations, which cannot be wholly suppressed, are driven into unworthy and mean channels. And they acquire a narrowness of spirit and a sourness of mind, together with a bias to one side only of life, which does not agree with the principles of human society. All kinds of incidental evils arise from these sources, in stating which I do not wish to accuse those ecclesiastics of unusual moral turpitude. Among them is the fact that, having individually so short and uncertain a time for governing, they think only of the present, and of serving their own ends, or satisfying their own conceptions, regardless of the ultimate happiness or misery which must be the consequence of what they do. Whatever advances the present interests of the Church or of themselves, for no man is free altogether from selfish motives, whatever enriches the Church or their own families, for no man can help interesting himself in those of his own house, is preferred to all wise, great, or generous counsels. You will perhaps wonder what the mystic spiritual religion of Molinos has to do with all this, but a moment's explanation will, I think, make it very clear to you. The hold which the priests have upon the civil government is maintained solely by the tyranny which they exercise over the spiritual life of men. It is the opinion of Molinos that this function is misdirected, and that in the place of a tyrant there should appear a guide. He is about to publish a book called La Guida Spirituale, which will appear with several approbations before it, one by the General of the Franciscans, who is a qualificator of the Inquisition, and another by a member of the society to which you are attached, Father Martin de Esparza, also one of the qualificators. This book, so authorized and recommended, cannot fail not only to escape censure, but to exert a powerful influence, and will doubtless be highly esteemed. Now the importance of Molinos's doctrine lies in this, that he presses the point of frequent communion, and asserts that freedom from mortal sin is the only necessary qualification. At the same time he guards himself from the charge of innovation by the very title and whole scope of this book, which is to insist upon the necessity of a spiritual director and guide. You will see at once what an important step is here gained, for the doctrine being once admitted that mortal sin only is a disqualification for receiving the sacrament, and the necessity of confession before communion being not expressed, the obligation of coming always to the priest as the minister of the sacrament of penance before every communion cannot long be insisted upon. Indeed, it will become a rule by which all spiritual persons who adhere to Molinos's method will conduct their penitents, that they may come to the sacrament when they find themselves out of the state of mortal sin, without going at every time to confession. And it is beginning to be observed already in Rome that those who, under the influence of this method, are becoming more strict in their lives, more retired and serious in their mental devotions, are becoming less zealous in their whole deportment as to the exterior parts of religion. They are not so assiduous at Mass, nor in procuring Masses for their friends, nor are they so frequent at confession or processions. I cannot tell you what a blessing I anticipate for mankind should this method be once allowed. What a freedom, what a force, what a reality religion would obtain. The time is ripe for it, and the world is prepared. The best men are giving their adherence. I entreat you to lend your aid. The Jesuits are wavering. They have not yet decided whether the new method will prevail or not. The least matter will turn the scale. You may think that it is of little importance which side you take, but if so, you are mistaken. You are not perhaps aware of the high estimation in which the reports and letters which have preceded you have caused you to be held at the Jesuits' College. You are supposed to have great influence with the English Catholics and Protestant Episcopalians, and the idea of promoting Catholic progress in England is the dearest to the mind of the Roman ecclesiastic. Inglesant listened to the Count attentively and did not immediately reply. At last he said, "What you have told me is of the greatest interest, and commends itself to my conscience more than you know. As to the present state and government of Italy, I am not competent to speak. One of the things which I hoped to learn in Rome was the answer to some complaints which I have heard in other parts of Italy. I fear also that you may be too sanguine as to the result of such freedom as you desire. This age is witness of the state to which too much freedom has brought England, my own country, a land which, a few years ago, was the happiest and wealthiest of all the countries, now utterly ruined and laid waste. The freedom which you desire and the position of the clergy which you approve is somewhat the same as that which existed in the Protestant Episcopal Church of England. But the influence they possessed was not sufficient to resist the innovations and wild excesses of the Socrates. The freedom which I desire for myself I am willing to renounce when I see the evil which the possession of it works among others and in the state. What you attempt, however, is an experiment in which I am not unwilling to be interested, and I shall be very curious to observe the result. The main point of your method, the freedom of the Blessed Sacrament, is a taking piece of doctrine, for the holding of which I have always been attracted to the Episcopal Church of England. It is, as you say, a point of immense importance, upon which, in fact, the whole system of the Church depends. I have been long seeking for some solution of the mysterious difficulties of the religious life. It may be that I shall find it in your society, which I perceive already to consist of men of the highest and most select natures, with whom come what may. It is an honor to be allied. You may count on my adherence, and though I may seem a half-hearted follower, I shall not be found wanting when the time of action comes. I should wish to see more of Molinos." "I am not at all surprised," said the Count, "that you do not at once perceive the full force of what I have said. It requires to be an Italian and to have grown to manhood in Italy to estimate justly the pernicious influence of the clergy upon all ranks of society. I have traveled abroad, and when I have seen such a country as Holland, a land divided between land and sea, upon which the sun rarely shines, with a cold and stagnant air, and liable to be destroyed by inundations, when I see this country rich and flourishing, full of people, happy and contented, with every mark of plenty and none at all of want, when I see all this, and then think of my own beautiful land, its long and happy summers, its rich and fruitful soil, and see it ruined and depopulated, its few inhabitants miserable and in rags, the scorn and contempt instead of the envy of the world. When I think of what she was an age or two ago, and reflect upon the means by which such a fall, such a dispeopling, and such a poverty has befallen a nation and a climate like this, I dare not trust myself to speak the words which arise to my lips. Those with whom you associate will doubtless endeavor to prevent these melancholy truths from being perceived by you, but they are too evident to be concealed. Before long you will have painful experience of their existence." "You say," said Inglesant, "that 1 or 2 ages ago Italy was much more prosperous than at present. Were not the priests as powerful then as now?" "I do not deny," replied the Count, "that there have been other causes which have tended to impoverish the country, but under a different government many of these might have been averted or at any rate mitigated. When the commerce of the country was flourishing, the power of the wealthy merchants and the trading princes was equal or superior to that of the priests, especially in the leading states. As their influence and wealth declined, the authority of the clergy increased. A wiser policy might have discovered other sources of wealth and of occupation for the people. They only thought of establishing the authority of the Church, of adorning the altars, of filling the papal coffers." Inglesant may have thought that he perceived a weak point in this explanation, but he made no reply, and the Count supposed he was satisfied. A few days afterwards he had the opportunity of a long and private conversation with Molinos. The Spaniard was a man of tall and graceful exterior, with a smile and manner which were indescribably alluring and sweet. Inglesant confided to him something of his past history and much of his mental troubles and perplexities. He spoke of De Crecy and of the remorse which had followed his rejection of the life of self-denial which the Benedictine had offered him. Molinos's counsel was gentle and kindly. "It was said to me long ago," said Inglesant, "that there are some men born into the world with such happy dispositions that the cross for a long time seems very light, if not altogether unfelt. The straight path runs side by side with the broad and pleasant way of man's desires. So close are they that the two cannot be discerned apart. So the man goes on, the favorite seemingly both of God and his fellows. But let him not think that he shall always escape the common doom. God is preparing some great test for him, some great temptation, all the more terrible for being so long delayed. Let him beware lest his spiritual nature be enervated by so much sunshine, so that when the trial comes he may be unable to meet it. His conscience is easier than other men's. What are sins to them that are not so to him? But the trial that is prepared for him will be no common one. It will be so fitted to his condition that he cannot palter with it nor pass it by. He must either deny his God or himself. This was said to me by one who knew me not, but it was said with something of a prophetic instinct, and I see in these words some traces of my own fate. For a long time it seemed to me that I could serve both the world and God, that I could be a courtier in kings' houses and in the house of God, that I could follow the earthly learning and at the same time the learning that is from above. But suddenly the chasm opened beneath my feet. Two ways lay before me, and I chose the broad and easy path. The cross was offered to me, and I drew back my hand. The winnowing fan passed over the floor, and I was swept away with the chaff. "I should prefer to say," replied the Spaniard, and, as he spoke, his expression was wonderfully compassionate and urbane, "I should prefer to say that there are some men whom God is determined to win by love. Terrors and chastisements are fit for others, but these are the select natures, or as you have yourself termed them, the courtiers of the household of God. Believe me, God does not lay traps for any, nor is he mistaken in his estimate. If he lavishes favor upon any man, it is because he knows that the man's nature will respond to love. It is the habit of kings to assemble in their houses such men as will delight them by their conversation and companionship. Amor I delicae generis humani, whose memory is fresh and sweet ages after, when they be dead. Something like this, it seems to me, God is wont to do, that he may win these natures for the good of mankind and for his own delight. It is true that such privilege calls for a return, but what will ensure a return sooner than the consideration of such favor as this? You say you have been unworthy of such favor, and have forfeited it forever. You cannot have forfeited it, for it was never deserved. It is the kingly grace of God, bestowed on whom he will. If I am not mistaken in your case, God will win you, and he will win you by determined and uninterrupted acts of love. It may be that in some other place God would have found for you other work. You have failed in attaining to that place. Serve him where you are. If you fall still lower, or imagine that you fall lower, still serve him in the lowest room of all. Wherever you may find yourself, in courts or pleasure houses or gardens of delight, still serve him, and you will bid defiance to imaginations and powers of evil that strive to work upon a sensitive and excited nature, and to urge it to despair. Many of these thoughts, which we look upon as temptations of God, are but the accidents of our bodily temperaments. How can you, nursed in courts, delicately reared and bred, trained in pleasure, your ear and eye and sense habituated to music and soft sounds, to color and to beauty of form, your brain developed by intellectual effort and made sensitive to the slightest touch? How can religious questions bear the same aspect to you as to a man brought up in want of the necessaries of life, hardened by toil and exposure, unenlightened by learning and the arts, unconscious of the existence even of what is agony or delight to you? Yet God is equally with both of these. In his different ways he will lead both of them, would they but follow through that maze of accident and casualty in which they are involved, and out of the tumult of which coil they complain to the deity of what is truly the result of their own temperaments, ancestry, and the besetments of life. I tell you this because I have no fear that it will exalt you, but to keep you from unduly deprecating yourself, and from that terrible blasphemy that represents God as laying snares for men in the guise of pretended kindness. God is with all, with the coarse and dull as with the refined and pure, but he draws them by different means, those by terror, these by love. Inglesant said little in answer to these words, but they made a deep impression upon him. They lifted a weight from his spirits and enabled him henceforward to take some of the old pleasure in the light of heaven and the occurrences of life. He saw much of Molinos and had long conferences with him upon the solution of the greatest of all problems, that of granting religious freedom, and at the same time maintaining religious truth. Molinos thought that his system solved this problem, and although Inglesant was not altogether convinced of this, yet he associated himself heartily, if not wholly, with the Quietists, as Molinos's followers were called, insomuch that he received some friendly cautions from the Jesuit college not to commit himself too far. End of section 38.